Welcome to Do You Even Lit? This week we are reading Gabriel García Márquez's landmark novel, 100 Years of Solitude, which is a fantastic chronology of 6 generations of the Buendías family, living in small-town Colombia and dealing with all the problems that arise as it becomes entangled with the outside world. If you haven't heard of this book, it's kind of a big deal. It literally won the Nobel Prize for Márquez. Critics and general population alike are huge fans of it. It's been described as the first piece of literature since the book of Genesis that should be required reading for the entire human race.
Who said that? The author?
Yeah. I didn't get the name of the critic. That was just like, the most fawning of many in that genre. It was quite hard to find anyone who had anything not nice to say about it. So continuing in that vein, I'm going to throw to you first, Cam. How much did you love this book? Do you wish we could give it 2 Nobel Prizes?
I think we're going to annoy a few people, potentially. Benny's Colombian friend might stop playing board games with him. And Rich's wife and my mother might be disappointed.
2 different people, to be clear.
Unlike the
not
book.
always the case.
And in that vein, the 17 girls that Benny's dating, which I'm not sure if there are any baby mamas. So I think they might all be let down because it seems like the 3 of us, surprisingly or not, didn't seem to like this book all that much. Maybe we just have similar tastes, but what's surprising, as Rich said, is you literally can't find a negative review on the internet. Maybe 1 or 2 in Melquiades' Sanskrit tome, but it's very hard to find a negative review. I found one by the other Latin author, Bolano. He said magic realism stinks. was his review of it. But apart from that, it's as close to universally loved as you get. As Rich said, both critics and fans love it. And I'm getting hints that all of us, maybe the exceptions there. So I just wanted to put some of my issues up front quickly, but I'm pretty open to being wrong about this. But I didn't like the pacing. I thought it was too fast paced. The characters, which we'll get into, are confusing to keep track of. And of course, the damn magical realism. But it just seemed like this fast-paced thing where like a lot of random stuff just keeps happening and requires a lot of effort, as is famous. So the author calls all of his characters the same name. So we have the Jose Arcadios and the Aurelianos, and then you also have the Amarantas and the Rebeccas and the Remedioses, and a lot of these names repeat. So it's very hard to get your bearings and keep track. So it requires a lot of effort. And, we've read a few effortful books, so I'm not against that in principle, but a lot of the time it felt like the effort wasn't worth it. Or it was hard to see it being worth it or why you were doing this, because it seemed just like a lot of random stuff happening, 12 times a page for sometimes not a lot of point. As I said, open to being wrong. I also think it could be a grower, unlike...
It's a grower, not a shower.
Yeah, unlike Jose Arcadio II. Namely, more so than other books. I could see myself looking back at this, whether as a kind of concept handle for its themes, or just as this kind of magical story, and looking back fondly. But yeah.
Should we give the listener a glimpse behind the curtain here as well, and just say that we tried to already record an episode about this, like when we were halfway through the book, and we were just so confused and just groping around aimlessly that we just had to shit can it basically and start again. So
like the book, we're going to make the same mistakes.
It's very likely.
We're doomed to failure.
Yeah.
And then just off mic, just before we started, we were saying like, I think kind of might like this book again. So yeah, it's going to be an extremely incoherent episode. And Benny, you're broadly aligned with Cam. You're going to talk more about your own beefs with the book a bit later on.
Yeah, and I'm actually even more aligned with Cam in the sense that in the last day, so we all sort of complained about it in group chat yesterday, and we even structured our outlines so that our criticisms wouldn't all appear at the same time. But even since then, I think the thesis, or my thesis about the book, has cohered enough in my mind where I think I can understand what the book was driving at. I think I understand like the main narrative arc and the themes that he was trying to drive at. And I think with that in mind, I can actually say that now I can understand the choices that the book made, and I can actually appreciate the writing style in light of what I take like the major thrust of the novel to be, and the messages kind of get across. I don't agree with the message. I don't like the message. And I think that's where my issue with the book comes. But you also can't read fiction expecting to actually like the underlying message, or at least I don't think that's the like right way to read fiction. So I'm kind of at this place where I can like appreciate the stylistic choices he made. But I kind of disagree with like the substantive message, if you will, or at least insofar as you think and agree with me that there is a substantive message there. But yeah, maybe the first thing we should talk about is just the style of the book, right? This is sort of, I think, like the main text that people refer to when they think about the genre of magical realism. And so, yeah, I didn't know much about like the history of magical realism. And I know, Rich, you've thought a bit more about that. You want to give us the lowdown on?
I just knew it stinks. That's all I had heard about.
Yeah, well, I'm tempted to do a big rant, but it's hard to beat. It stinks. For concision. Yeah. So, what the hell is magical realism? So, it's like it's a response to realism. Realism, you have trying to depict the world more or less authentically as it is. So we've read quite a few writers in that vein. It's kind of like what you think of as the maybe default mode of literature. And then you have modernism, where you get more into subjectivity and fragmented perspectives and not necessarily having a ground truth. So we've read also, Woolf in that category. Joyce would be in that category. Maybe Kafka, I guess. And then magic realism is basically a twist on realism where you have supernatural or magical elements, except they are not treated as exceptional. So the characters in the story just treat them as mundane. They're a mundane part of life. So in this book, for instance, we've got ghosts that pop up when certain people die, but not necessarily when everyone dies. We've got it raining for 4 years nonstop. We've got a plague of insomnia. What else we got? We got a woman who gets spirited up into the sky along with the laundry and a gust of wind.
A long streak of blood that takes turns and goes through the village.
Yeah.
We have yellow butterflies following a man everywhere he goes.
People living for very long times.
Yeah, over 100 years. More than 100 years of solitude. We have
flying carpets.
No. Yeah, so all sorts. We have babies turning up in baskets.
Don't babies always turn up in baskets? That's how it works.
Yeah.
So I'll compare magic realism to fantasy to give an example of how it differs. When you're writing fantasy, what you do is you tweak one element of the world that you live within, change the rules in some way, and then you see how the characters and the people within that book respond to the slightly changed rules of reality. So you get a sort of a sandbox where you say, what if dragons existed? And how would that play out? What would that mean for the power structure of warring kingdoms or whatever? Or you can do it with science, where you can say, what if a certain technology existed? What if we had interstellar travel? What would that mean? What if we had widespread cloning technology? And then you play within the sandbox and see what the implications are. Or you can do it even with sociology or anthropology, like we saw with Ursula Le Guin, where she says, what if you had a serious society that was seriously trying to do anarchic syndicalism? Let's explore. Let's see how that looks. And then with magical realism, you very deliberately don't get that. So you don't have internal consistency in your world, and you don't have clearly defined rules.
So it's like Philip K. Dick, basically.
Well, at least Philip K. Dick was doing the meta. But in magical realism, you're not meant to delve too deeply into why a certain thing happened, or in what circumstances someone comes back from the dead, or why this object flies but not that object. There's no rules, and you as the reader are not meant to be fixated on that, and certainly the characters are not fixated on that, because for them it's just like, magic carpets is in the same category of things as magnets or a steam train. There's no distinction between them.
But so is it common that they're kind of inconsistent with each other or incoherent? Because I would have thought, it could also be just this element of magic is just part of the world, as are magnets, and then they perhaps should cohere. But then it's harder to get a distinction from fantasy, perhaps. I wondered if part of the distinction was just kind of a literary quality. Something reads like literature and would be realism or something close to it without the magic.
Yeah, I think that is part of it, because it's so associated with Latin American writers in particular, and there's like a certain aesthetic associated with that. Where you compare, like, Kafka could arguably be considered like proto-magical realism, because I remember my naive take, I was mad when Gregor wakes up as a bug and no one reacts, right? It's just like no one comments on the fact that he's a bug. So that's the same kind of a thing. Within that world, that's not the exceptional thing, but it's like a metaphor for isolation and alienation from one's peers and so on. But here, that's not the case. It doesn't need to be that the butterflies are a metaphor for this, or Remedios flying away into the sky is a deep metaphor for this or that. There doesn't actually have to be like a certain parallel. It's kind of like deconstructing the Western literature notion that this has to be in here because it causally links to this other thing or means something. It's just like, no, we live in a magical world, and magic just sort of manifests in all of these interesting ways. So I really bent over backwards last time to make the case that this is fine, because I've been like a hater of this genre before, and I wanted to really try hard and really try to meet it where it's at.
Rich is like the dog in the house, in the burning house, just like, this is fine, as random incoherent elements get introduced into the book.
I really didn't mind it for a good length of time into the book, and I think that's why last week or last discussion I was ready to defend it, because it's a vibe. It's just a vibe. Like, the argument I made last time is that this is not about spurgy analysis of disentangling which Jose Arcadio Buendía is married to whose niece's nephew and constantly referring back to the key or whatever, or exactly why the butterflies or whatever. It's just meant to wash over you. It's meant to be impressionistic. It's meant to evoke a certain type of mood or make you feel a certain type of way, and you're meant to just get swept up in it and feel this book more so than honest, try to explicitly think it.
When you look at a lot of the praise online, like, one of the most common words you'll find is beautiful, right? That this book is beautiful. That's often like the defense of it or the praise from it. So yeah, along that lines, this kind of impressionistic vibe that is elegantly written and has this kind of magical beauty to it.
Yeah, it is beautiful. I mean, I was gonna walk back this thesis, but now I'm kind of like back there again. Like, all I'm left with is this impressionistic reading, which is actually fine, and that I enjoyed and would enjoy in small doses. Like, if this was a collection of short stories or something, I think it could have been great, and I got exhausted of it in a 400-page novel. But I certainly enjoyed, at the start of the book, when I started reading it, I was like, oh damn, this is going to be good. I was really excited, and I thought this would be a great book. And then as I finished reading it last night, I was like, man, this is actually a beautiful book. And then there was just a 200-page slog in the middle where I was getting a little bored and it felt a little repetitive, and I did have to skim large parts of it.
Even though it's universally praised, when I mentioned my struggles with reading it to people, they did sympathize with. I mean, maybe that distinction of Kahneman's experiencing self versus remembering self. So people that had a fond view of the book, but yeah, they did sympathize with it being a slog. I mean, and certainly getting your bearings and finding out who's who, and just all this random stuff happening, and just you feel like you're slogging through it.
Yeah, I mean, I think this book is basically the stem cell kryptonite, right? Like, I think insofar as this is correct, that you're supposed to just let it wash over you and it's supposed to be impressionistic. This is exactly how we're trained to not read a book, right? Like we're, we want to map out each character, understand who's related to, try and work out the rules of the road, figure out when magic's going to appear, when it's not going to appear. And you almost have to train yourself or explicitly talk yourself out of trying to read this book like that. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's why we all struggled a lot.
I'm not totally sure of that thesis, though. Like, I agree, there is this approach where it doesn't matter. Who's who doesn't matter. Like, and that's one of the themes. But I imagine a lot of fans really enjoy kind of nerding out and drawing the tree. Like, that's quite that would be, I mean, now every copy comes with a tree, and there's like a million ones online to download. But just drawing the tree, finding out who's who, noticing the differences between the Jose Arcadios and the Aurelianos, and just noticing all these different love triangles and inward facing love triangles.
They need new geometry for the types of love arrangements that are happening in this book.
Yeah.
They need like non-Euclidean geometry.
Yeah, not quite a triangle. Yeah.
The love manifolds.
Macondian fractals. But yeah, I think a lot of people, it is kind of worth knowing who's who and the differences between these people as well. But at the same time, I think it doesn't matter to take that approach as well. Anyway, let's hear the case. I want to hear the whether it's your view or not now, Rich. I want to hear the case against magical realism.
Okay, yeah, I thought I'd kind of given it, but
sorry.
No, to get a bit deeper on the exact thing, I had a bit more insight on the exact thing that bothers me. I was thinking it was something around like not having a well-formed problem space, to put it in like super nerdy Popperian terms, similar to my beef with what's his name, Beckett, where it's like when you don't have internal consistency, then it's not obvious what problems are trying to be solved, what the possible set of solutions are, and you don't get the little payoff of figuring out, oh, this happened because of that. When Jose Arcadio II dies in his room with a mysterious wound and this trail of blood snaking out, it's not set up as a whodunit that we're going to resolve or get any clues as to later. It just happens. There's no rhyme or reason. You move on. And it's hard to separate that from just randomness. But the actual deeper problem I have, I realized, is that you talked, Cam, about how the characterization in this book is not great because it spans so many different characters. It moves so quickly between their marriages and affairs and divorces and deaths and so on that it's already hard to relate to them. They're unlikable people for the most part. There's virtually no dialogue. We don't know what their motives are. And then on top of that, with this magic realism stuff, it's like, what's at stake for these people? Like, what is at stake in a world where some people just return from the dead arbitrarily? How do you feel scared on their behalf or yearning on their behalf? How do you feel invested in their struggles when the world is just so completely arbitrary and that they don't even particularly care about it? If you think about Jose Arcadio Buendía, who is the main character, the original patriarch of the fictional town of Macondo, the first guy we get introduced to, he is a man with a deep burning curiosity about the world. So he's obsessed with alchemy. He's trying to turn lead into gold. He wants to open up Macondo to the world. He has all these obsessions, and then that's reflected in quite a few of his descendants as well. But like, how do you reconcile the fact that they are supposedly deeply curious, but they just have no interest whatsoever in like the fact that there's a flying carpet or the fact that someone like is pursued by giant clouds of butterflies? So it's just like, it undermines the characterization even more because these aren't real people. They don't have real motivations and wants and desires because the rules of the world are just totally meaningless and can't constrain them in a way that's interesting from a character point of view. So that's my deeper critique of magic realism, and the thing that I just can't. I know that it doesn't mean that the genre stinks, as who was it, Neruda or Bolaños said. It's just that it has these limitations, put it that way. And so I'm back with the impressionistic reading, which is fine. It's just, is it fine for 400 pages? In my experience, no. And maybe in your guys' experience too. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have the exact same notes. I even have my notes even say I agree with Rich. To prove that we're the most agreeable.
Evergreen.
Yeah.
This is like Melchiada's parchment predicting.
Yeah.
This is all determined.
Always on mic though. It's just it's as you said, even without the magic, you're not invested in these characters. Random stuff's happening, and the magic kind of accentuates it and elevates it.
I mean, I think the point that it makes it harder to identify and understand their struggles as characters and to like empathize with them is a very deep point, because you're not sure how they view the world now. You don't have any sort of mental model of being able to sympathize with them, because you don't know what's going to surprise them, what's going to be off-putting, what sort of solutions they might bring to bear on the problems that they're facing in their lives, because they could just pull literally a rabbit out of a hat and solve it in some bizarre way that you hadn't foreseen, and that wouldn't like break the rules of magical realism. Whereas, that's not the case in when we're reading Crime and Punishment, right? And then you can really sympathize with the character because you understand the rules. This guy has killed this old woman. To some extent, you can put yourself there and then understand what sort of tools are available to him to solve his problems. You can understand the struggles he's undergoing, but like really cuts off your ability as the reader to engage in any sort of like cognitive empathy with the characters. And that just makes for a very hard, disorienting reading experience. Yeah, I think that's a nice point.
Yeah, and even to echo like Rich's example of when Jose Arcadio II dies, and it's just like no one really cares. Everyone moves on, even though it's this big mystery. And even in the opening scene, which is famous now, where Colonel Aureliano facing the firing squad and thinks back to the time where his father showed him ice, and it kind of sets up, this interesting thing that we want to find out, and that resolves itself quite early, and there's not a lot of meaning to it either. Like he escapes the firing squad kind of randomly, like sort of everything else, and then they just move on and forget about it, and it's not a big deal. And it just that seems to happen a lot, and you just grow to realize that there's nothing you're kind of moving forward towards or that you care about all that much. I mean, when you do finish the book, you do kind of see this overarching, okay, it's this 6 or 7 generation town as the main character that was born and died, perhaps.
It's such a banger of a first line, so it makes it even strange that it doesn't. I mean, it does have some thematic significance, to be fair. The line is, many years later, as he faced the firing squad, Colonel Aureliano Buendía was to remember that remote afternoon when his father took him to discover ice. There's interesting points there, but not actually around him meeting the firing squad, which also comes up repeatedly. Then he meets the firing squad and they don't kill him. I can't even quite remember why.
His brother saves him, actually, but the colonel or the captain that was leading it just sort of lets it happen.
Yeah. Or rather, it's not that it's not plot relevant, it's just that it's one of 1,000 random little things that happen throughout the book. And there's no great significance attached to any given death, saving, affair, war, battle, fight, suicide. You're just absolutely deluged with this chain of events across 100 years of family history. There's something else you said that I wanted to pick up on, but I've just lost the thread. Just also the example of Jose Aureliano II dying. It's a great
Arcadia.
Hey?
Jose Arcadia.
Jose Arcadio. Oh my God.
50-50,
I had a 50-50 chance and I still fucked it up. That's a great juxtaposition because that's one of the really cool magical scenes in the book, of which there are many, which you can imagine would be so dope it's probably in the Netflix adaptation, I imagine, of this line of blood snaking its way through the town and it ends up in Ursula's house. So it's like the blood of her son making its way to her. Beautiful, evocative scene. No apparent meaning attached to that event, or if there is, you have to dig pretty hard for it. Certainly no one in the book cares about it. And that's just how it always is. There's so many funny, interesting, fascinating, beautiful events in this book, like I often really enjoyed, but it's just there's so little connective tissue, at least at the level of individual characters and causality of this event being leading to that.
Yeah, they often don't care and move on. Like Jose Arcadio the first ends up being tied to the tree quite early on for the rest, the rest of his time in the novel, and people just ignore him from there. Or Amaranta dies, and people move. Like it's. I mean, I suppose the blood is kind of perhaps a metaphor for the news finding itself to the mother, who's the matriarch and knows everything about the town. But yeah, in terms of him passing, people who have a pretty cursory, think about it and then move on, like everything else.
So what do you guys think the point of writing it in the magical realism style was? Do you think a similar book could have been written in like a realist style and then gotten the same message across, like touched on the same themes, etc.? Or do you think it was like integral to what the book was about?
I think it's related to one of the themes that we're going to talk around progress and technology. But other than that, I think it's more this impressionistic thing that he, I mean, biographically, I think the author, he said his grandma used to just tell him stories and just throw magic in there, and he liked it. He liked the vibe, and I think people I think people generally like the vibe of magic, like going back in time for whatever reason. I haven't kind of clocked why.
It has this like truer than true element to it, I think, is what having this tool in your toolbox allows for. Where I was going to talk about this later, but since you brought it up, there's an interesting example where towards the end of the novel, when the banana company bring in the army to massacre all the striking workers, and one of the characters, one of the Jose Arcadios, is like caught up in the massacre, survives, and is haunted by that scene, the 3,000 dead bodies piled into railway cars to be dumped in the sea. So that is it's closely modeled on what actually happened with the rapacious Western banana companies that came to Latin America. But the 3,000 number, Garcia Marquez made it up, basically, and he made up the scene, the specifics of the scene, and then it circled back and entered into actual historic accounts. So, apparently, he said, what's really surprising is that now they speak very naturally in the Congress and the newspapers about the 3,000 dead. I suspect that half of all our history is made in this fashion. It's you can speak in these mythological terms that in some sense, feel like truer than true. And maybe in this like Baudrillardian sense can possibly even circle back and change the base reality. So what is it? A signal is now just pointing to another signal. We've lost the ground truth. It's like a very powerful tool.
Yeah. And I wonder if it allows readers to like map some of the lessons onto their own life or like identify with it a little more if you add some of the magic, because then you can sort of like twist the world in whatever way is sort of like more convenient for you, or like allow yourself to be reflected in the characters without like totally identifying with them or something. I don't know.
I think it's mainly just people like magic because it's magical, like in the other sense of the word, but like in all of
maybe.
our and religions and just stories and fables, like you just have, I can imagine the grandma telling the story to her grandchildren on her knee, and it just adds flavor and spice to it. And there is something about it that you have this fictional rural town place, which obviously has this parallel of his hometown and captures that, but has this added magical realm to it, which make it quite memorable. And some of the instances, as we've talked about, the blood and the butterflies and Remedios the beauty certainly flying off into heaven, like they're quite memorable set pieces as well, whether or not they have a sort of meaningful metaphor behind them.
Yeah, I think that's right. Everyone universally loves this stuff. It's probably just the simplest answer. since you're a kid, you
Except
love
for
this stuff.
rationalist nerds.
Yeah.
But even like
struggling to explain it, we're all like, why do they like it?
just imagine if we were like I really like Greek mythology, for instance, and imagine if I was like being like, well, one source says that Athena was born of blah blah blah, and another says that she sprung forth from Zeus's head. And what is this method of giving birth via someone's head and via a man? Like, it doesn't make any sense. And it's like, this is spectacularly missing the point, right? Like, they're cool stories and they're interesting for other reasons that don't have to do with them hanging together with some internal coherency that spurgers like us would obsess over.
I remember the flying carpet one. That one there, I was just like, oh, that would be so useful. Like I trekked over rural Colombia, like, you know, in swamps and like, you know, just to the,
yeah. He's like, no, you know, the great invention of the new century, ice, frozen water. Yeah.
Which was described as hot. Was that just meant to be this kind of, I don't know.
No, I think that's the point. Like, if you touch, right, like if you didn't know anything about ice,
kind of hot.
and if you touched it, you'd kind of wonder if you were burned, right? That would be sort of the language you'd use to describe it, I think. Like, wow, it shocked me or it burned me. Yeah.
I guess if you live in the tropics, ice must have been like it actually must have legitimately been one of the greatest inventions ever.
Yeah, well, I think in Colombia and rural Colombia especially, it took a while to arrive.
Let's talk about Macondo, because we haven't even gone there. Like, the setting of this story is important. So, Benny, I'll hand over to you. But basically, it's a small town in rural Colombia and on the Caribbean coast, initially cut off from the outside world, and then that changes through the course of the book. So, yeah, what do you think about the place and its interactions with the outside world?
Yeah, so I think it was actually based on like where he grew up. Is that right? Did you guys read that somewhere?
At a Caratata or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let me give you how I've started thinking about the book, how I've started conceptualizing it, and then we can fit Macondo into that and some of the other themes as well. But this will also allow us to maybe touch on some of the characters in a more linear way. But I've basically started viewing this fractally. So I think he's getting across the following arc, or he's exploring the following arc at many different levels. And the arc is something like you start out in innocence, and then you like aspire towards something, or you try and modernize in some way. You reach towards something, and then you have like a fall from grace, or a period of corruption or something. And then finally you have like decay and erasure and oblivion. And I think this is basically the arc that hits you as a reader at multiple different levels, like nested Russian dolls or something throughout the book. So first you have this at like almost every single character's level. So just to give a few examples, right? Like Jose Arcadio Buendía himself. So he has this like early fascination with knowledge and magnets, and he sort of thirsts for new knowledge. He becomes obsessed, ends up abandoning his responsibilities, goes mad, and is like tied to a tree for 100 years, and then eventually dies. His son, the colonel, originally just innocent, likes doing alchemy with his dad when he's young, optimistically joins the liberals in the Civil War, ends up becoming this absolutely ruthless general that almost orders the execution of his friend, and is only at the last second saved by his mom. But he just becomes bitter, ends up shooting himself in the chest. The other son grows up well-intentioned, leaves Macondo, comes back as some sort of bizarrely tattooed, massive, decadent man, and who's like throwing orgies and stuff in the town. He gets murdered, as you guys were discussing. Amaranta, same thing. Like all these characters sort of have these similar arcs. It doesn't work out well in the end for anyone. And then you abstract yourself one more level. You have this, for the family itself over the 6 generations sort of starts this way. You have this like sort of beautiful original coupling of Jose Arcadio Buendía and Ursula, and then their various children and stuff, and them themselves aspire to various things throughout life, and the family eventually declines into oblivion, and at the end of the novel is totally forgotten. And then you also have this at the level of Macondo itself, right? So it gets founded as this sort of utopia, and then tries to start interacting with the world, both via the gypsies, and also tries to become one of the centers of like trade, economic trade in the world via the banana company. That obviously goes horribly wrong and ends with the banana massacre. And then the town itself disappears into oblivion by this storm at the end. So anyway, we could keep going through examples, but it's basically this very pessimistic arc that haunts the characters and just, like the general storyline at like every different level throughout the book. And given that, it's hard not to read the book as some sort of commentary on like the the futility of aspiration or modernization. It's just like these never-ending cycles of decline that don't lead anywhere. None of the characters end up being happier at the end, really, than they were at the beginning. I don't think you can say that they learned valuable lessons along the way or something, and then even though things didn't work out in the end, it was like good to have that struggle. It seems like the struggles are mostly just negative for all of them. There don't seem to really be silver linings, and it just seems to be about like fatalism and determinism. And so I think that's part of the reason I didn't like it, because I just don't I don't epistemologically like that message. But like putting that aside, so given that if you agree with me that that's the message of the book, then I think the writing style conveyed that message quite well. So like I and I think you guys had a similar experience where you try and read the book, like just trying to parse what's going on page to page is very difficult. Like it's just like putting even the magical realism stuff aside, just like tracking the characters. Like Cam said, things are happening very quickly. You're sliding back and forth between various characters. Everyone's named very similarly. So it's like, which generation am I in again? You're not sure if you're talking about the second son, the third son, everyone's cheating on each other in various different ways. And like tracking specific details.
Right. Sometimes I try to orientate myself and do that, and then you'd go back 3 or 4 pages, and it still wouldn't help. You know, what I mean? Usually you're in a book that might help, and you're just lost.
And I would go back 3 or 4 pages and be like, I don't even remember this detail. It's like I'm reading this for the first time again. But it also gives this weird element. It's like everything's sort of self-similar in this way, and it just kind of hits you. And I think the point is like, it doesn't matter, like the details don't matter that much for any of these individual characters, like because the arc is the same, and it's like it's not going to work out well for anyone. They're all aspiring to slightly different things, fine, but in the end it doesn't matter. It's just like fatalistic and futile, and from the beginning this thing was not going to work out very well. And so yeah, anyway, given that that's the message, I think he wrote in a style that really lends himself to like that sort of theme. And so I can appreciate that a bit. I'm still a bit stuck on why he chose to do the magical realism thing, which is why I asked you guys the question earlier, but you can kind of see it, right? Like you couldn't have things like Jose Arcadio being tied to a tree for 100 years if you don't introduce magical realism. So like in some ways, there are some necessary elements to like highlight some of these cycles of despair. But yeah, instead of me talking more about Macondo now, maybe I'll just let you guys react to that and see if you agree or disagree.
Well, it's interesting just you talking that. So are you guys familiar with Oswald Spengler's view on like history?
Yeah.
I'm not.
Oh, okay. Well, it's very similar to what you just described, Benny. He has a view on cyclical history, and funnily enough, like Marquez seems to inadvertently have written like a Spenglerian text with some differences, but Spengler kind of viewed cultures and civilizations as analogous to an organism, and it's determined that as organisms, I mean Deutschian and Aubrey de Grey concerns around aging and death aside, but an organism is born and it grows and it kind of reflects its soul, then it kind of decays and finally dies, and there's nothing you can do about it. And his famous work was Decline of the West, that he thought the West was. So he's writing this in the 20s and 30s that was going to happen, and he argued at the time that things like decline in fertility rates and stuff like that like aren't causes of it. These are just symptoms of like we're in the final stages, and this happens to all great civilizations and cultures like Egypt and classical Greco-Roman and Indian and China, but he also viewed these cultures as separate. So he was pushing back at the kind of Enlightenment idea of kind of the Whig history of like linear progress, and he thought, well, you can't. All these civilizations are kind of different, and then there are these different organisms, and they all have the same arc. So like Macondo fits into this very nicely, but it just has this exact arc. So when it like reflects its soul, I think Spengler talks around like religion and art and stuff like that. So that's like the peak of the culture and the civilization. And then when it starts to decay, that's when you come in like technology and materialism and bureaucracy and all that goes before its death. And this is like, this exactly happens in Macondo. But I suppose one maybe slight difference is, I think when Spengler talks around like history being in cycles, he just says like any new culture or new civilization will have this arc. And so ancient Rome had this arc, and now our civilization culture is separate from that, and will have this arc as well. And Macondo will have this arc. But in this book, what we also see is we see instances and characters repeat themselves. So I'm not sure if that's necessarily Spenglerian, but where, you know, the Jose Arcadio 1 and the Jose Arcadio 2 and the Jose Arcadio 5 like all make the same mistake of, you know, trying to bang their auntie or something, which we'll deep dive into a bit more later.
We've all been there.
Yeah.
It's nice though, don't you think, to have those like micro cycles within the mesocycle or macro cycle?
Yeah.
It's kind of like a little fractal thing. It's a structural thing that we should give credit for, and that I think I didn't really realize until you laid that out, Benny, about the trajectory of Macondo mirroring the trajectory of each character. I also hadn't quite realized that you're right. Like Macondo ends as a nothing town where no one. Well, that's not quite right. It ends as a town where no one remembers the Buendía family's name, and it peaks really soon. So, like quite early in the Spenglerian cycle, I guess. It's funny because it's originally quite a primitive town. They have to bush bash through the swamp to get there. Their huts are made of, I think, like mud and banana fronds kind of thing. But they're very proud of it. They've got no formal government. They just have the town patriarch, and they are proud that no one has ever died in Macondo for a long while. But it seems like maybe it reaches its peak. Like it maybe I'm having recency bias of the later part of the book, but I'm remembering a lot of decline and not a lot of peaking and ascendancy. I guess just because bad things start happening fairly early on in the piece.
Yeah, the insomnia plague happens like, I don't know, chapters 3 or 4. I can't remember exactly, but very early on, and the heat wave.
There's a biblical parallel too that I just noticed, which is that I had been thinking of Macondo as like the pre-contact Eden equivalent, you know, the land of abundance and peace and no one dies. But then the big 4-year deluge at the end is like the flood, right? It's like Noah's flood, cleansing the earth of the wicked and leaving behind just a clean slate to start over, I guess. So I think that was very likely on purpose.
Yeah, because that rain, 4 years of rain, that happens, I think, after the banana massacre. And it's quite directly biblical. But even if there aren't direct analogies between them, it certainly felt biblical. Like, you know, you can imagine things like that, like the plague of insomnia or something like happens to a town and then ravishes another town, and things like
true.
that had a kind of feel to it.
And even Jose Arcadio and Ursula feel a bit Adam and Eve, right? Like they go off, they found this town. I guess instead of Eve eating the apple, it's more related. Jose Arcadio, Buendía eating the fruits of knowledge or something. So it's, you know, the man sort of sins.
Meeting the gypsy.
Instead of the woman. Meaning the gypsy,
The snake is a gypsy.
Yeah, the snake is a gypsy. I swear, Ursula, he's just a gypsy. But yeah, it's definitely reminiscent of that. So, I mean, I think it was hard for me to divorce my dislike of that sort of message from like appreciating the book itself, which I think like a real critic of fiction would be able to do, right? Like you should sort of be able to just judge how well the book investigated a certain message and not actually pass judgment on the message itself as saying something about reality. But that's just hard for me to do. I just don't like
just back up a sec, Benny. Like, what is it exactly? Is it the fatalism that you don't like? like fatalism is kind of a bankrupt philosophy.
Yeah, like it's the so it's the fatalism, and it's sort of this, I think, anti-progress sort of message that runs throughout it, right? Like you have these people aspiring to do things, to contact the outside world, to learn about things, to engage in trade, to integrate themselves in the wider world, and like none of this works well. You know, all the various love affairs don't work well, and so it's sort of this like aspire to what you will, but it's all going to end in disaster. And moreover, this is all predetermined. There's no way to escape this cycle. All, you know, the future of humanity is just destined to.
Well, the final sentence says, because races condemned to 100 years of solitude did not have a second opportunity on Earth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Funny.
I do wonder if there could be kind of this sort of Straussian take, or, you know, esoteric take, that it's maybe pro-progress or something like that, or like a critique of anti-progress. I don't think that is the author's intention, but, you know, so as in the title, you know, it's called Solitude, and this family in the town often are inward looking, including their romantic relationships, and like that keeps going wrong. It's like they reject. I think at one point, I can't remember, maybe it was Ursula, she suggested maybe we call him something else. Don't call him Jose Cato, call him Roberto or something. And they're like, yeah. Like call him Pedro or something, and they don't, and like that goes wrong, and then so they're looking inward to their family to date, and they're not looking to the outside world for progress, and like that goes wrong, and town goes wrong, and it's like this sort of is what happens. Buendías are condemned to this because of their solitude or their inwardness. That, well, they just seem condemned to it because they're condemned to it, but
Dude, this is so funny. I had the exact same thought. Like I think like you, I don't think it's true, but intended or not, like a Straussian, there's a Straussian reading of this book where Garcia Marquez is disgusted with his illiterate, solipsistic, incestuous countrymen, and he considers them entirely responsible for their own fate and downfall, and he's maybe lampooning the idea that the outside world has been their downfall, because like everyone says that this book is like anti-colonialist and maybe has tinges of being anti-materialist or anti-progress, but I actually, if it's there, it's not very heavy-handed. I mean,
you have the banana instance is one obvious example, who the Americans, but apart from that, it's kind of like this history of like Colombia like against itself, or like Macondo against itself, that everyone's fighting.
So you wonder if this is like his allergy to the stupidity of Latin America making the same mistakes. Like, I know it doesn't have to be one thing. It's like, I feel he is angry with his countrymen here, and it's not an anti-Western, anti-progress, anti-technology book explicitly. Does that convince you at all, Benny? I mean, I'm not saying that's what he was trying to do. It's just kind of like, maybe the Straussian reading that you take away. Like the people are so unlikable and so backwards and so insular and so obsessed with themselves, and he's very clearly putting that forward as a recurring mistake, their insularity and their solipsism.
It's kind of like, have you heard Alex Tabarrok's take on Parasite, the movie? Where like he's kind of like, it's in the title, like they're parasites. They're doing all this despicable behavior. They're like taking advantage of people, that, you know, and it's like, there's kind of this Straussian like reactionary take on it, which, you know, once you see it, you can kind of see it's there.
I would like to find this convincing, but I think I don't. I mean, one of the first cycles is Jose Acardio Buendía himself on this quest for knowledge, right? And he's like, he becomes obsessed with alchemy, he becomes obsessed with mapping, he becomes obsessed with ice, in order to improve the livelihood of his people in Macondo, and this just ends in disaster. And you would think if the underlying message was like actually pro-progress, stop being inward looking, etc., then someone like looking to the outside, in particular to the gypsies, who come with new knowledge and new technology and stuff. I don't know why then you would choose to have like that go so poorly. Instead, you might have him be initially interested in that, and then Ursula or someone from the town demand that he stop engaging with the gypsies because he needs to take care of X, Y, and Z in the town or something, right? Like I think you just would have made different choices as the author if that's the actual underlying message. And then the banana farm thing, or the banana factory, or banana company, is then confusing on that front, right? Because they sort of become like one of the epicenters of global capitalism for a little bit, and then that obviously ends in travesty. So yeah, I'm just not fully. I would like this to be true, but I'm just not fully convinced.
No, you're right. It's hard to say it's a pro-progress argument. It's more just like, what's the real root cause of the problems here? But it doesn't actually make a pro outside world engagement case, or it'd be hard to argue that it does.
Well, I suppose, Benny, also you don't really subscribe to this idea that like a civilization or a culture is this kind of organism that dies.
Yeah,
this cycle, this Spenglerian view, you totally reject it.
You don't believe in historical determinism?
I don't. Spengler as well.
Work history or
thought
not?
That not only that there are these cycles of history, but he thought they were predictable. Just as you could roughly say like how long an animal is going to live, he thought you could say like roughly how long a civilization would last. And I think he made predictions on that front of. I mean, that's what the decline of the West, his sort of magnum opus was.
Interestingly, he also said rural areas capture the spirit or the soul for longer than urban cities, which start decaying earlier. So there's like this additional element of you have this rural Colombia having represented maybe via this sort of magical element as perhaps a substitute for art and philosophy and spiritual means and religion.
So do we even, like, on historicism, do we even need to talk about it, or we all basically just don't think that history is sort of totally determined in that manner? I mean, it seems, for me, I'm tempted to say it's just straight up silly, but I don't know if there's a more sophisticated
I don't want to talk about it too much, but funnily enough, I'll just flag, like, I am a little bit sympathetic to that there've been some truth there. So it's almost like Benny hates the message of the book, and part of my turnaround on the book was like, this is kind of a synecdoche or a concept handle of this idea, which is kind of this nice aspect to it. I'm not. My instincts are lean against it. The more kind of classical view of linear history, and progress. But I'm not. I'm more sympathetic to that there being some truth to that idea.
Do you know what historians tend to think about it? Do they think everything is contingent and it's just all causal and you just need like a really good model of this led to that? Or do you think you can pick out like higher level patterns that recur between civilizations and that will recur with like some kind of strong probability regardless of what's happening at the local specific level?
That's an excellent question, actually. I would love to see a survey of historians discuss that. My guess is historians are so aware of like the complexities and small little decisions that have massive consequences in whatever period they're studying that they would be somewhat immune from thinking that there are like these broad cycles or like things that will necessarily repeat in epochs in history. That would be my guess. But obviously, I'm not sure. And obviously, there are some historians, and especially like sociologists, and now some computer science leaning folks like Peter Turchin who think the opposite, who like want to try and identify these like broad historical patterns and project them into the future and stuff. But my guess is that among historians, it would be the minority view.
Mm.
I think, funnily enough, like Peter Turchin's cliodynamic predictions and like maybe the Spenglerian predictions independently viewed like a decline happening around about now, I think. So yeah, if you were
looking not bad.
Well, yeah, if you were kind of Bayesian about it, you go, well, these independent theories predicting decline.
I mean,
and Mercury's in retrograde, so
and 20, that was 2012, but so yeah,
okay,
yeah.
I was listening to Dworkish had a good guest on recently, a historian talking about the fall of the Roman Empire, of which I know nothing. And it was interesting to hear him say that actually he thinks most of it came down to being struck by a couple of plagues in close succession. And it was just like basically like arbitrary events. It wasn't this myth around the populace becoming decadent and the values eroding and so on, and all the kinds of lessons that we might like to sort of project onto it. It was like, yes, a plague came along and wiped out 40% of the population, and that's very destabilizing at a demographic level.
I hadn't heard that take until that as well. But yeah, I mean, speaking on whether history repeats or something, like part of, I think, that meme of, men think about ancient Rome every day, which, as funny and cool as that is, I think it's not true. But, part of the truth to it is thinking about parallels, right? Of the rise of Rome and the empire and the decline and seeing it now and seeing a potential repeat. I mean, there's a famous phrase, of course, history is a strange way of repeating itself, which is out in the culture. I think, we come from this sort of Deutschian progress background where we think that there is no reason why even though every empire in history has lasted to, I think, around 300 to 400 years on average, and less since the Roman Empire, there's no reason to think that would apply to us now or to Macondo.
Yeah, I think I remember Taleb saying that it's like a Lindy kind of a pattern where you essentially saying that you have a flat prior on how long any given group or civilization will last. So you should expect to be roughly halfway through its duration. So if it's been around for 1 year, you can expect it will last 1 more year. If it's been around for 1,000 years, you should expect it to last 1,000 more years. And so when a civilization does collapse, it's like maximally surprising, basically. I don't actually know if that's like borne out in the data, but that's just sort of stuck in my head.
I mean, it can't be, because if like the average person, if they reasoned like that, would be wrong. Like most people will be completely wrong. That's like these kind of arguments are always strike me as weird, because like using their own language, if you just take the outside view on them, if everyone reasoned that, where should I expect to be in this trend? If I'm, I should expect to be roughly halfway through given a flat prior, like most people will just be very wrong. So it seems like, like you could just use like Bayesian language to then just be like, well, I shouldn't
You should pick a better reference class.
This is exactly the thing I should not expect. Like,
yeah. It's a good point. Why not just look at how long empires tend to last instead of using a flat prior? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think that is about 300, 400 years. I think. Well, okay, so, I mean, just to bring it back to book slide, so why we're talking about history repeating itself.
I was trying to get Benny to say that he likes Bayesianism.
I like real Bayesianism, not pseudo-Bayesianism.
Oh, man, there's the most insane fetishization of Bayes post that I've ever seen yet up on Slatstar Codex at the moment. Sorry, it's a guest post, but it's like...
is it the... Yeah. I skimmed
it's wild.
It. I skimmed it. Yeah. About teaching it in school, right?
He's like, we've got to get the kids to understand Bayes, like this one particular statistical tool that's useful in certain circumstances. We've got to integrate it throughout the entire middle school curriculum. Yeah, it's just, it made me laugh.
Sometimes you go to like some presentation or conference and people use those unintuitive like little thought exercises around like if there's a bat and ball that costs $1.10, or like the class one for Bayes would be around that, you go to the doctor and this many people have breast cancer and this many people don't. But, like if someone's familiar with it, like because they've just read it before, they've been exposed to it, and then like you're in the presentation or something and they get people to put their hands up, there's that smug guy who's just like, he's like, yeah, I mean, this is obvious, it's like the probability of an accountant and a feminist, like that's contained within it, it's like, fuck, man, like you would have made this mistake.
Yeah.
It's just because you happen to have read it, but they're sort of acting like it's obvious. Anyway, so the reason we're talking
personal experience,
I remember the face of this.
You strike me as the kind of guy who would have your hand in the air.
I mean, potentially like hesitatingly putting it up, but No, I mean the point of it is to show that people don't get it and it's unintuitive.
What would you expect the probability is of a person whose hand shoots up very quickly knowing the answer to the question, depending on the base rate of the number of people in the room who don't put their hands up? It's Bayes all the way down.
Yeah,
It's Bayes all the way down. Oh God!
I wonder if it's worth talking about
activism has done nothing.
The reason why we're talking about history repeating itself is not just because you have this decline, this determined decline in the town, which you don't find out till right at the very end, but it's also, as we said, some things, some instances repeat themselves. So I just wonder if it's worth just going over what recurring things actually happen. So as we've alluded to, we have the names that keep getting repeated, which it seems to be there's like a nominative determinism aspect to these names. The Jose Arcadios have a personality and the Aurelianos have a personality. You also have this theme of incest, which it seems is a very strong, prevalent theme. Then you have the wars, I suppose, famously the 36 wars. And those are probably the main things. I think sometimes the path, I think Jose Arcadio, the patriarch, like took the path to Macondo. I think his son, Colonel Aureliano, I think sees the same sort of Spanish ship. But apart from that, it's mainly like the names and the wars and the incest, really, which we can talk about them individually.
Yeah, we start and finish with incest. So we got to go to our resident incest expert, Cam. What's you got?
I know you mentioned Kafka's metamorphosis of the bug representing alienation and isolation. I didn't want to correct you that it was really about incest. Yeah, I mean,
I'm waiting for that essay, by the way. Reading incest into Kafka.
It's funny just for this book, like it's such a popular book, like you're kind of surprised how strong a theme it is, really. So, if not the main theme, apart from history repeating itself, pretty edgy. So, I mean, just to look what happens. So they're cousins, Ursula and Jose Arcadio, and then there's just other instances. It's usually like an auntie. Everyone's keen on, or a great auntie. Everyone's keen on Amaranta. Oftentimes people don't fully know, or they kind of know. Not always. So sometimes you kind of have the get out of jail free card, or there's like the stepsister, or
oh no, stepsister, what are you doing?
Yeah, stepsister. I know.
But just to spell out the founding myth, because there's a nice symmetry where Jose Arcadio, Buendía, and Ursula don't want to have sex initially, the founders of the town. Her mom, Ursula's mom, won't let her have sex because they're cousins. They have a common ancestor. And the mythology is that if you have sex with someone you're related to, then your children will be born with pig's tails. So they're really scared of that for a long time. And then finally they actually do it and everything turns out okay. But then down the line, with enough incestuous unions along the way, the very last child that's born in the book does in fact have the pig's tail, turns up with a pig's tail, which is the product of a nephew-aunt relationship, which is the classic pairing that you mentioned, Cam, that crops up quite a few times.
And then gets taken away by ants, right?
Yeah, and that's pretty gruesome. That the baby is killed and taken away by ants, basically as soon as it's born. And the baby's mother, Aureliano's aunt, dies during childbirth, and that's basically the end of the Buendía line. So it's a horrible sort of coup de grace, which is set up right from the very beginning. So yeah, that's one of the big central points, clearly, and one of the recurring mistakes. So does anyone have a sense of why that might be so prominent in here? Other than that, it's like the sort of flesh and blood. What would you call it? It's like it's an example of solipsism in carnal terms.
I think that's probably the main reason, which I didn't realize till later. But yeah, this kind of inwardness and solitude, that even towards the family, is part of for whatever reason, the Buendías are condemned to it. I think it must also be somewhat of a commentary around like small rural villages. I mean, there must be a level of inevitability to this, right? They just don't have many people, or like founding populations as well. When you get these like small bottleneck founding populations, I mean, even in the biblical myth, right, Adam and Eve, like you have that thought where there's just not that many people, and your cousins are all there are. Now that doesn't seem completely true for the Buendías because the town grows bigger, and they still just seem to have this lusting.
Yeah, they might have had that excuse in the early days, but not by like the second generation. There's plenty of non-Buendías to fornicate with.
Yeah. Which is, I mean, speaking of like, are these people like this? It's not a very common motive, I think, to want that. Like, I think, as I said to us off mic, that parents don't. It's not like this concern for parents to leave if they leave the kids time alone, like they're going to start messing around. Not to say that happens 0 times, but in general, it doesn't happen.
What's the optimal number of times?
Optimal number of pigtails.
It's non-zero.
Yeah. Yeah, if you could just convince Ursula of that.
I mean, like, but actually, like, wasn't it? So,
well, I think
hold
the
on.
optimal.
So, you'll know about this, Cam. What's the really smart type of Jews called? The Ashkenazi Jews. Aren't they super bottlenecked? And it means that they got like weird diseases, but they're also really, really smart.
Yeah, well, yeah. So they were bottlenecked to like a very small number, I think, in the 1200s, 1300s. Like I can't remember exactly, like 300 or something, maybe.
Oh wow,
that is a
so
theory.
There's definitely some consanguineous relations going on.
Yeah, well, right? Even now, I think it's fairly fairly high. Like, have you ever seen those like consanguinity heat maps as well? Like, it's quite common in like non-weird
consanguinity heat.
Yes,
of course I've seen.
Don't have one of those on your wall.
That's an episode title right there.
It's my wallpaper on my computer.
But from memory, I don't think it's too strong in Latin America. But I mean, I think I've seen theories that like Christianity is one of the barriers against that. It pushed against that, and sort of the same way Ursula does. These very strong norms against cousin marriage, and that there's an argument there that one of the consequences of that is universalism, because you're no longer as tribal. Yeah, I mean, yeah. So
which
I
ties
think
back to the insularity of the family, right?
Yeah. But I think the main point is around this inwardness. But it is weird. I mean, a lot of the times, almost all the times, it doesn't get consummated, and a lot of the times they don't know. So it's just like the hot. Well, you assume she's hot because she gets with everybody, but like the hot gypsy Pilar, I think she's
hot in the Netflix adaptation.
Even when she's 100.
Haven't got that far yet.
Yeah.
Ursula's hot in the Netflix adaptation. I've only seen like half of the first episode, but
no, I've seen a still of her. Yeah. She looks like a 60-year-old Latin American mama, grandma.
Ursula,
maybe that's when she's 100.
She can get it,
even if she's a cousin. Yeah. So I think we touched on it. There's this kind of inevitability in small town. I mean, it is odd how strong it is. Yeah, I mean, like one of the Aureliano twins, I think, like he really wants to get with his auntie. He knows, he knows she's the auntie. I mean, that also has that added like age gap. I mean, I think she's getting pretty old at that point, Amaranta, and he just really wants to.
The Zoomers would lose their fucking minds, eh? Yeah. They're mad about like a 31-year-old guy being with a 26-year-old woman who are not actually related by blood. They're going to absolutely lose their mind when they read this book. There's also just like, there's sexual misconduct in here. There's a lot of it. It's like, there's the incest, but there's also, there's like bestiality. There's lots of whoring and like very young whores were meant to, it's like a horrible phrase, which is like the girls who lay down so that they might eat or something, which I think just means like really poor young girls who.
Yeah, I mean, like one of the Aureliano twins, I think, like he just really wants to get with his auntie. I think
prostitute themselves to get a meal. And there is, and then the other like quite bizarre one by modern sensibilities is Colonel Aureliano's obsessive love with a 9-year-old girl, and he very gentlemanly waits until she gets her period before they consummate the marriage, I think. But even then, it's probably like age 11 or whatever. She dies in childbirth.
11 or 14,
it's pretty gross. And it's like also the Buendía family just like exerting their pressure to force this little girl from another family to marry into theirs. It's like very one-sided thing. And this is one of our leading men. Colonel Aureliano Buendía is like almost our main guy for the first half of the book, I would say, and we follow his wars quite closely, and we think in some sense he's meant to be a champion of the dispossessed and the underprivileged and so on, because he fights these rebel wars. But he's a pretty rotten character, really. Which actually I wanted to talk about one other idea I had of a recurring mistake here, is that there's very little true love, genuine love or connection within this family. So like speaking, it might just be that we don't get the interiority, but like speaking of Colonel Buendía, there's a quote that I want to read out where Sid Ursula realizes that Colonel Aureliano Buendía had not lost his love for the family because he'd been hardened by the war, but that he'd never loved anyone, not even his wife Remedios, or the countless one-night women who had passed through his life, and much less his sons, his 17 sons, who he has like no relationship with. She sensed that he'd fought so many wars not out of idealism, as everyone had thought, but that he'd won and lost for the same reason, pure and sinful pride. The son for whom she would have given her life was simply a man incapable of love. And when I came across that passage, it got me thinking that a lot of relationships, almost all the relationships in this book, are just very loveless. There's lasting, there's power dynamics, but there's so little tenderness. It's really gruesome. So I'm definitely open to thoughts here, but possibly just yet another reflection of the solipsism here is that people are quite selfish in their desires, and they're not really, they withdraw into themselves like physically and metaphorically. Everyone is shut up in their rooms, and when Rebecca loses Jose Arcadio, she shuts herself up until she's like this horrible withered husk of a person, and Amaranta cuts off her nose to spite her face twice with Pietro, and then with the Colonel Herinaldo, who is in love with her. She could have been happy with either of them, but she chooses to die a virgin and just totally retreats into herself.
Maybe that's why everyone wants to bang her?
Is Amaranta an object of affection? Yeah, I guess she is.
All the nephews. Just yeah. Well, I mean, the Italian chooses Rebecca at the start before that. I mean, I think that's right, Rich. I think also part of the loveless or the unexplained love is maybe a consequence of this kind of fast-paced random stuff. Part of the random stuff happening is like suddenly this person's in love with that person without much rhyme or reason, and then suddenly they're not, and you're just not that invested with a lot of the relationships. There's just like kind of more stories of some random sexual encounter, and like I can't even, this might be my fault, but I can't even remember why Colonel Aureliano gets with the fortune teller. So Jose Arcadio first did, and then he did. Like, just seemed to like randomly happen, and then never really has anything to do with her after that.
Well, he was like a very shy young man, and he had weird hang-ups about sex, and so he developed a fixation with her, and she helped break, what would you call it? Like break the seal, break the ice.
Yeah.
And then, as I said last time we were talking about this, and that clearly led to a really healthy sexual evolution for him, where his next object of affection was a 9-year-old girl who he insisted become his child bride. So, like...
I think speaking of the age group, I think Marquez himself or his father, I remember reading, I think he had a young wife.
Well, it's getting biblical again, isn't it? So, Muhammad style.
It does kind of fit. Go on, Benny.
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting point that I hadn't thought of. I mean, I think, you could argue that at the very beginning, Ursula and Jose Arcadio Buendía do share some real love.
Yep.
That's sort of the only one throughout the book. I mean, people have lots of kids, obviously, but yeah, you're right. At least the book just doesn't focus on affection, the actual affection in these relationships.
I want to just on people having lots of kids though. Like, I actually think they don't. Like, of course, you have this. I mean, Marquez is famous for these hyperboles with Colonel Aureliano having like 17 kids, all with the same name, and he goes to 32 wars. And Jose Arcadio travels the world 64 times, and etc. But when you actually look at the family tree, most family trees would split off far more than they did. Like, you kind of have the first generation, and then Jose Arcadio and Arellano, they have
the branches of most trees don't fuse back together.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but it's not just that. It's kind of like once you get to third generation, like one of the children has like another 2 or 3 kids, and like no one else does. And then you get to the next generation, and then like one of the kid has. So it's kind of odd in that sense. I mean, maybe
it might be like an artifact of storytelling that it would.
Yeah,
you couldn't, if it was like combinatorial, you couldn't track the sprawling descendants. It would have to be like.
But I'm sort of surprised you didn't do that because of but perhaps you need to, because like, you could kind of get 3 or 4 every generation.
Yeah. All right, so. I mean, it's interesting. It seemed like we all were complaining about the book a lot this week, but in this convo seem to have somewhat changed our minds. Where are you guys at with this? Do you like it? Would you recommend it? What are your overall takes?
I'd probably just say watch the show without having watched it. I don't know. I still didn't love the experience, and I'm not sure if I'd recommend it. I think I'm still puzzled by how popular it is, really.
I want to echo what you said, Benny, on our never to be released episode. We were really groping around. We have done much better this time, I reckon. But last time you said, if there's any readers out there who love this book, it would be really great if you could write in and tell us why. And you don't need to like criticize our arguments or try and convince us. Just if it's purely an experiential thing, like it made you feel a certain way, whatever it is, like is valid to you, I'd be pretty interested to hear about that. But I'm not as hostile to the book as I was when we were in the messaging and stuff. Like, would I recommend it? No, I don't think I would, but there's something there. I liked parts of it a lot. I liked the first 50 pages. I liked the last 50 pages. And, the less said about the middle part, the better, It'll be so fascinating to see whether this sticks with us as time goes on.
Yeah, I could see that happen.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is a useful reference point for a book that explores cyclicality and fatalism. Like, I think it's going to occupy that sort of shelf in my mind, and then I'll, reference back to it in that capacity. And then obviously also with respect to magical realism, if that comes up again. I mean, we should perhaps point out to the audience that this bit of magical realism was, of course, written before any other magical realist work I think we've come across in book club, in particular in Everything is Illuminated, which was written, of course, after this. And are these the only 2 books that we've read here that have touched upon?
Maybe kind of
Piranesi,
yeah. So there's so there's been a few, all of which are after this. Kafka was
actually, I don't think Piranesi counts because the magical in there is awe-inspiring and evokes like a lot of curiosity and wonder. So no, I would scratch out Piranesi.
And there are rules to the game in Piranesi, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I also just want to say the word fatalism just made me think, could you write a magical realist book that wasn't fatalistic? Is it sort of tied into the very style itself? Because if you're introducing these elements of arbitrary events happening that characters can't do anything about or interpret, is it possible to write a non-fatalistic book? And maybe that's going to be my problem with the genre, is that if you're not a fan of fatalism as a descriptive theory of reality or as like a philosophy, then it's pretty hard to escape that if you can't give your characters any consistent framework to work within and constraints that they can solve problems against and How do you get around that in magic realism?
I mean, so would you describe the magical realist arc in Everything is Illuminated as fatalistic?
It felt a lot less so.
Sort of.
Yeah.
But
it didn't have the explicit stuff about the inevitability of destruction. Things felt more contingent and less deterministic. And also there's a dosage thing there where like you get half or a third of the story, and that resolved some of my problems with this book where I mean, in retrospect, like, yeah, I like Everything is Illuminated a lot more than this book, to be honest. And I think partly it could just be from breaking up the story. I think was a great move on his part, and interleaving it with actual characters who you can actually emotionally resonate with, and that worked better for me, that format. I can't handle 400 pages of it. That's my main takeaway. I don't hate it. I just can't do this huge tapestry of this very high level tapestry 400 page thing. It doesn't work for me. I'm open to short stories. I'm open to movies and TV shows. I'm not open to doing like a huge novel.
Yeah, I think it's a great point to point out that this could/should have been either a series of short stories or just one short story. I think that, the messages could have gotten across. Some of the better plot beats could have been put in there, could have skipped a lot of stuff that never really sticks with you as the reader.
I mean, it kind of is a series of short stories in a way, just in one big novel.
Did you notice also the chapters have no titles or anything? There's just no
no numbers.
It just flows. It's constantly interleaved. There's no breaks. You don't get like cleanly delineated time jumps or anything. It just all merges endlessly together, which I think is the point. These are not even exactly criticisms. They're more just like the thing that he's trying to do and the way that it feels to engage with it.
I mean, I think all the stuff. No, you go.
I was just going to say we could try and like quickly speculate a couple of reasons why this hasn't worked quite as well for us. And one of them is obviously that people say this is a book that really captures the spirit of Latin America, the Latin American experience, and that is just an experience that we don't have. And there's a ton of parallels to Colombian history in here around what was it that you said, Benny? The 1,000 Days War, and then there was some political violence during Garcia Marquez's lifetime.
Which shows a direct kind of thing you can imagine from Marquez thinking like of history repeating itself, right? It's like before my time, I heard about this 1,000-day wars, which totally, destroyed society of conservatives and liberals hating each other. And then, during my time, it seems to happen again.
100%. Yeah. So I think that would be a lot enriched. That could be very enriching if we were familiar with the history and generally just like the story of Latin America, how it was born, how it was influenced and shaped by the various colonial powers, and what life is like in rural small town Colombia or any other number of Latin American countries. We don't have that, and I think that could make a big difference. Oh,
yeah.
Sorry, yeah, go for it. And one other thing.
I just think even in that, the Colombian identity of I think at one point the author even talks around these two intertwined families, the Buendías of Ursula and Jose Arcadio, have been intertwined. I think they even say it's like two races, right? And that's potentially, Jose Arcadio is a Spanish name, and I forget Ursula's maiden name, but like potentially more of an indigenous sounding name. But yeah, just this mixture of
Iguaran,
mestizo. Yeah.
Kayla Gwyn, I think.
The crossover we never knew we needed. Yeah, the other thing I wanted to say is like people might say, oh, well, you guys didn't read the book. You read an English translation of the book, because I forgot to even mention that this is a book obviously written in Spanish and we all read it in English. I don't actually think that's a big factor here for two reasons. One is because it's written in modern Spanish and it translates really nicely into English, actually. It's like translation is always fraught for things like idioms, puns, wordplay. There's no getting around those problems. But like in Spanish and English, because they have such common heritage, there's like very direct cognates for so many words. It translates very cleanly and the grammatical structure is similar. So I spot checked like a few bits. It was too hard for me to read.
And
completely.
2, I speak Spanish, motherfucker.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. Yeah, I don't speak it well enough to really weigh in. But I want to say that, like, I mean, everyone knows that there's like lots of perfect cognates in Spanish as well as lots of non-perfect ones because of the Latin roots. And more convincingly, perhaps, like Garcia Marquez signed off on this translation, and I think he said that it's like,
oh, really?
Maybe even better than his work or something. He said something very positive about it.
Yeah, no, he said that.
And this guy's like picky about adaptations of his work. So
cool.
yes, I'm sure it's technically in some sense better to read it in Spanish. I just read a few pages, and Phoebe's reading it in Spanish, and she said it's like she actually, I think, quit halfway through. So yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I mean, Marquez's quote must not be true, but imagine being the translator. Would be a pretty baller thing for the author to have said about your work.
Yes. He has this really consistent philosophy, I think. I was reading some interviews with him. There's a good interview in the Paris Review. He definitely has this impressionistic approach to life, which I think supports our reading of this book. He's not particularly interested in Western intellectualism or perfect factual accuracy for things. So because he's a journalist by vocation, and the interviewer is asking him what's the difference between journalism and fiction, and he's saying like, no, it's the same thing. I don't think there is any difference. The sources are the same, the material is the same, the resources and language are the same. And so he's talking about like the way that you should do an interview. He objects to the use of tape recorders. He says the way that you should do it is you have an interview, direct human connection, and without having to record the exact words spoken, and then afterwards you reminisce about it and you conjure up like a sort of an impression of how the conversation went and how it felt, not using the exact words, and that's you interpret it with like a certain loyalty to the character of the person you're speaking to, and so on. And this is his method of journalism, which is very interesting to read
Truth
about
of
as
facts,
a former journalist.
Truth of feeling, eh?
Yeah, exactly.
Truth of fiction.
Anyway, it's some good little clues
Zofa,
there.
or Zomi, or what is it?
It's Mimi.
Maybe. Well, one of the
It's truer than true.
It's true and true.
Renata's called Mimi, isn't she?
Oh,
One of the
yeah.
kids' nickname, yeah.
Mimi.
Yeah.
Mimi. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I shudder at that description of journalism. That freaks me right out. But, to each their own, whatever. Yeah.
Well, it makes a banana story extra funny too, right? Where you just like wrote an actual fictionalized book, and then it somehow circled back into the general historical accounts of what happened. So I think he'd be quite pleased with that.
Jeez. All right. Well, any closing thoughts?
No, not really.
I'm happy to leave it there. I'm so hyped to find out what book we're reading next.
Yeah, you guys ready?
So Benny, it's your turn to pick.
All right. We're doing a big one, boys, because that's what this book club started with, and that's what we do every summer. So next book is Anna Karenina.
Oh,
Nice.
Holy shit. Oh, no,
I didn't know.
When you said big book, I was scared, but this is the best. I think it's one of the best possible
big books
titles that could follow from that. Yeah.
I think we're coming up on 2 years, I guess, of the book club. I guess we passed 2 years. We started in May 2020.
We better finally read a big book.
30, I guess. We better finally read a big book. I feel like we got to read some Tolstoy. It's embarrassing if we go too much longer without diving in. And we did Crime and Punishment last summer. That was kind of our big summer book that we dove into. And I figure Anna Karenina would be a good one for this summer. So
love that.
Buckle up unless there's any vetoes, I guess.
That sounds good.
No veto from me.
I'll just have to buy another book now.
What'd you think it was going to be?
I got my prediction.
Oh, you thought it was going to be a Man Without Qualities.
Yeah,
that's
what I was. You were alluding to, Rich?
Yeah,
which I was less worried.
A book without quality,
as Richard.
I'm just gonna have to read that on my own, I guess. You fuckers.
All right.
So, how did you choose between Anna Karenina and War and Peace? And which one is longer? Did you just go with the shorter one?
War and Peace is like 1,000, and Karenina is like 700.
Well, thank you.
Karenina is shorter. I also, to be honest, I just did look up like I just kind of basically took internet opinion about which one's better to read first. And it seems like the rough consensus is that Karenina is the one to start with. So,
Cool.
Game on.
Oh yeah, I'm excited. Let's do it.
Unclear. I think we'll just start reading it and then make a call about how often we want to meet, how many pages we want to do, etc. I honestly haven't even cracked it open, so I'm not sure how difficult it is to read or anything. I don't know if we're in crime and punishment territory or if it'll be easier or harder. Should we settle on a translation, actually? Or should
we're thinking Richard Pevere and Rosa Volonsky? Or I'm not sure
I've heard they're the best.
Also.
They're the best. And it really matters.
Hell yeah.
I can't wait to do our entire first episode as translation discourse.
All right. Well, I'm stoked.
Nice.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Please write into us, doyouevenlit@gmail.com, DOU, just the letter U, evenlit@gmail.com. We'd love to hear what you think, how we horribly butchered this amazing Nobel Prize winning book. Please, we're definitely open to criticism and want to know what other people got from it. Yeah, and otherwise, we'll see you for Anna Karenina. See you next week.
Yeah.
Bye, guys.